capacity on child marriage, on child sexual abuse.
To enlighten the parents and the children so they can take care of themselves to avoid this rape that is going on in this community. We also taught them how to make sanitary pads for themselves, because sanitary pad right now is expensive, and if they can make that, they can also do it as business for themselves. And also
community leaders in these communities called for adequate intervention in addressing any form of gender-based violence in their community.
We are going to make use of those ones that receive this very training to further engage them in time of training others, so that the community will be able to the other children can be able to learn from them, so that they can be able to tell exactly what of this victim is going to occur in the nearest future.
Anybody is a girl to take advice and the alert of your mother. Don't do head of knowledge of adopt your mother.
I understand. I learned everything a lot. I learned my lesson now because I can tell other girls the condition I have, and everybody will learn the lesson now.
The SOA initiative also set up a community child protection committee to feature out victims and report them to relevant authorities to address these social vices. Norma Omeje for Moneyline with Nancy.
Shell Nigeria has said that it will assist the federal government in providing electricity for millions of Nigerians using renewable energy. Sources of renewable energy include solar, wind, and the federal government has stated that the number of Nigerians that lack access to electricity from the national grid has increased to about 92 million. The Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabo, said that adequate access to energy has been a global challenge. Okay. Chad's interim president, Mahamat Idris Deby, has declared his plans to run in this year's presidential election. His confirmation came at the end of a week in which opposition politician Yahya Diallo was killed in the capital in N'Djamena, prompting deep concern from the European Union. Now let's move over to the markets. The all-share index of the NGX saw a 3.27% decline week on week, closing at 98,751.98 points. The year-to-date growth increased by 32%. That's from January till Friday last week. YTD stood at 32%. The equities market is expected to have a quiet start this week. What do we also have today? Transcorp Power will list by introduction on the Nigerian exchange. That is today. It's offering its 7.5 billion ordinary shares at 240 naira per share. This marks the first listing for 2024. If we take a look at some other listings, that's it on the screen there. If you take a look at some other listings that have been by introduction on the NGX, Boa Foods listed in January 2022, it listed 18 billion shares at 40 naira each. Geregu Power listed in October of 2022, it listed its shares at 100 naira per share. It listed 2.5 billion shares. VFD Group listed 190 million shares in October of last year at a share price of 244 naira 88 kobo, while Mikio Industries listed 4 billion shares in November of last year at 2 naira 96 kobo. Transcorp will be listing today at 240 naira per share. The company will present its facts behind the listings after the closing gong ceremony of the NGX today. Now, if we move over to the currencies market, the naira strengthened against the dollar by 704 basis points week on week, reaching 1,548.25. That is 1,548 naira 25 kobo to $1 at the Nigerian Autonomous Foreign Exchange Market window. In the FGN Eurobond market, we saw the sentiment was mixed last week due to various reports from the United States, including a slight decrease in the U.S. GDP for the fourth quarter of 2023 to 3.20%. Nigeria's GDP stood at 3.46% in the last quarter of 2023. Bearish sentiment persisted throughout the week following the increase in monetary policy rates, that's the MPR rate, to 22.75%. From 18.75%, and the cash reserve ratio to 45% from about 32.5%. The average benchmark yield increased by 46 basis points, ending the week at 17.28%. On the Treasury bills market, the auction saw a total subscription of 1.13 trillion naira as against 500 billion naira offered by the CBN, while interbank rates rose due to increased liquidity caused by various outflows, including FX intervention payments and NMPC remittances to the CBN, as well as settlement of the OMO primary market auction. All right, and that's it for the markets as we speak. Let's move into our first interview, and we saw a statement signed by the Acting Director of Corporate Communications of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Hakama Sidi Ali, revealing that the CBN had revoked the licenses of 4,173 bureau de change operators over their failure to meet regulatory guidelines. My guest is joining me right now, Kelvin Emmanuel, who is the Director of Medicine, ACNA, Nigeria. Hello, Kelvin, and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you, Nancy. How are you today?
I'm very well. Kelvin, please, can you pronounce the company again so that I can get it well?
It's actually Obsidian Achana.
Sorry?
Obsidian Achana.
Okay, Obsidian Achana. All right.
Yes.
I hope I don't murder it again. But thank you very much for joining me this morning. Kelvin, let's start with the monetary authority. Has the monetary authority, which is the CBN, has it been on fire lately?
It has.
Okay.
Since January, it has. I think they went into like a management retreat, and they came back and they started sending out circulars. They first came out with all-in rate and all-check. They came up with net open positions. And then they came out with BDCs. I'm also expecting that either before the end of the first quarter of 2024 or beginning of second quarter, the CBN will provide revised guidelines for the banks on recapitalization of the banks. I also, if you follow the development closely, Nancy, you see that the Senate is already beginning to consider debate of the amendments to the CBN Act of 2007. I've seen the draft, and I think that the changes are well in line with what the consensus and expectation and estimates are. So yes, the monetary side of the divide is doing their end, but the fiscal side is yet to pick up on the fiscal reforms that are necessary to complement the monetary side that will slow down inflation and stabilize the foreign exchange market, which is the source of nightmare and worry for every boardroom in Nigeria today. Nancy, the number one issue across boardrooms in Nigeria is FX. Number one issue.
And that is actually a major component in driving inflation, because if you go to the fufu seller, now even the firewood seller, she will tell you, here say dollar don't increase.
Yes, because
so there's a pass-through.
She's subject to transporting cassava by road, and that has diesel and fuel component in it. So
yeah.
Nobody is insulated from inflationary pressure on, whatever they... I'll give you an example. So companies are not able to give out pro forma invoices from quotations or requests for quotes. In Nigeria today, that usually is valid for 30 days. They're not able to give out requests for quotes valid for more than maybe 24 hours for a few days. If you ask me to supply you a certain quantity of maybe iron rod for property construction, I practically might not be able to give you a quotation that will last for more than 48 hours. That's how bad it is. Why? Because most of the supply chain for what people do has an FX exposure.
Yeah.
And whenever you're not able to plan as a business because of how volatile the FX market is, then you know that you're in an economic crisis and a recession.
You know, it's so sad because I even saw some companies, their financials over the weekend, even I think as a Friday. In fact, I've been seeing the foreign exchange losses, MTN, Nestle, and all of that. So you've been seeing that these companies have been witnessing forex losses. But let's look now at the 4,173 BDCs that the Central Bank of Nigeria has revoked their licenses. Do you think that this will bring a realignment to the structural each part of that market? Because if you take a look at it, BDCs are part of the structure of that market. So is this a realignment of the structural imbalance in the forex market?
I think it's a realignment, and this is an issue that has been debated for a very long time, because a few years ago the central bank had banned the BDCs from being able to access foreign exchange. Now they've created like a framework, a guideline, because the BDCs were basically like giving licenses to operate as finance companies, and they were no guardrails. They could do anything they like. They give out dollar loans, they accept payments, they do spot forwards transactions, they make payments, third-party payments overseas with partner finance companies overseas. Basically, like they were running like parallel banks, without a proper banking license, without reporting structure. Their transactions are not reported. They could source for dollar from anywhere at whatever volume. It's not reported, it's not audited, it's not controlled, it's not managed by the Central Bank of Nigeria like the banks that are regulated are required to report to the central bank. So I think what the central bank has done, saying that politically exposed persons, NGOs, charitable organizations, listed a whole lot of categories of people who could not BDC licenses is well in line. I think the central bank has also said that he wants to see who the shareholders and directors are, to know if they are usually proxy ownership, like we've seen with politically exposed persons, having proxies run BDCs for them and then giving them priority in terms of being able to access foreign exchange at the weekly window. So I think this process where the central bank has revoked the license of 4,173 and is doing like a filtration exercise is necessary for them to be able to start supplying FX to the BDCs that are well capitalized and that are obeying the extant laws that the central bank has put together to ease the pressure on the market. But at the end of the day, let's not mistake these peripheries for the main issue that we have in the FX market, which is cost for the instability and the high volatility index we've seen today, that the market is still illiquid. And as we speak today, we still have net negative reserve at nearly $2 billion.
So yes, the issue is that of supply, but don't you also think that this is also perhaps, let me say, like a backdoor solution to the issue of supply? Because we have, at least before Friday, about 5,690 BDCs in the country. And that same last week, the Central Bank of Nigeria started allocation of $20,000 to BDCs. So with the revocation of 4,173, I guess we should have about 1,517 BDCs now. So the CBN will have less number of BDCs to be allocating $20,000. So I hope you understand what I'm saying. So
Nancy, there are some people that own 5 BDCs. There are bankers that own BDCs.
Yeah, you're right. So is this pruning also part of it too?
Yes, the central
bank
is
right with that, yeah.
Licenses of 4,173, to ensure that you don't have a situation where people go bid for FX from the CBN and then take advantage of the arbitrage opportunity in the black markets. You don't also have a situation where people bid for FX at the CBN and they hold it and they don't sell it, hoping that the rates are going to rise and they will make profit from the spread. The fact that the central bank has also placed a cap on how much cash transactions BDCs are allowed to do is also a master stroke, and that there has to be disclosure on who you're selling to, because if you have an account with the bank and you do transactions with the bank, everything is recorded. Yeah, everything there's a paper trail for everything that the central bank can always use to do its assessment and evaluation of the financial system and the stability of the financial system. The BDCs don't have that paper trail. What the central bank is trying to do is create a paper trail to see demand and supply dynamics and to avoid money laundering. Because what you've had is that apart from the issues in the banking sector on AML and CFT, the BDCs have also contributed to the fact that Nigeria currently is on the grey list by the Financial Action Task Force on AML and CFT. So I think this is also going to add to strengthening that framework for tightening anti-money laundering and getting Nigeria off that grey list, which is also very important for attracting financial flows, not just for the government, but also for companies that deal with other companies overseas.
Kelvin, the issue now will be, how will this impact the rate of the Naira? Because that is what everyone wants to hear, that if the central bank is on fire and coming out with different policies per day, it has revoked the licenses of over 4,000 BDCs. How will this impact the Naira? One would expect today is a Monday. Of course, the Naira should react today. And how will it impact it in the short term? I want to see a Naira, for me, I want to see a Naira that is less than 1,500. I'm sorry. If I have my way, it will go lesser than that. But I know that the economic forces that add to that.
They're down to $1.8 billion US. Yeah, they still have outstanding. The $30.4 billion they took from Afrexim and the syndicate partners, which Project Gazelle, very questionable deal in my opinion. I'm not going to go into the details of that deal, but the monies they took from Afrexim and the syndicate of Heritos, is what Cardozo is using to draw down on the FX forward that outstanding. He's drawn it down again by another 400 million. He announced it at the MPC meeting that you asked a very brilliant questioner, that they paid another $400 million last week. But there's still the outstanding of $1.8 billion. He has to clear that outstanding. He also needs to raise up Nigeria's net external reserves to at least $7 billion to meet up with the balance of trade for 1 year, which is anywhere around $6.8 billion. And in my estimate, he needs about $8.5 to $9 billion to. Press the president to, go look for a foreign support line to bring in emergency liquidity that CBN.
Do you think, sorry to cut you short, Kelvin, do you think that the president should do that now in Qatar? Because yes, these are Gulf countries that have serious petrodollars now. Those countries, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, all these people, man, the kind of dollars they have.
Nancy, Qatar supplied its first LNG in 1996. Nigeria built its first trains between 1999 and 2005. OBJ built 22 million metric tons per annum. Now, since 2005, Nigeria has not added a single million to its LNG train. Qatar built its first LNG train in 1996 and supplied its off-taker in Japan, right? And since then, Qatar has risen that production output capacity from where it started to currently about 110 million metric tons per annum. And Qatar hopes that by 2027, 2028, it will ride it up until 142 million metric tons per annum. And that might exceed the capacity of Australia. Within the last 7 years, America 7 years ago was a net importer of LNG. Today, America exports LNG and is number one ahead of Australia and Qatar.
So Qatar, Australia, I really don't know the kind of conversations that the president is having with those guys. Now,
the question now is that, look, if Qatar, as shared Muslim country, is supporting its Gulf neighbors in Egypt and providing liquidity and stability support for its Gulf neighbors, what's the benefit of Nigeria being in OPEC if it can't go to those OPEC and non-OPEC countries alike in oil and gas to look for support? Why are you in Qatar if you can't, speak with the Qataris about having its central bank providing an emergency
support,
intra-central bank lending that is needed to stabilize the FX markets in Nigeria, and look for technical cooperation on how Nigeria can ramp up its LNG capacity? Nancy, as we speak today, NLNG is at 58% capacity utilization. In the 2024 financial year, I expect that the dividends NNPC will collect from NLNG will drop below $1 billion because there's force majeure that has been on since 2022.
And they've told them not to even export, that all stuff should be for local consumption.
No, that's actually for propane and butane, the little butane that it produces, which is about 0.9% of its composition of the natural gas. I'm even talking about methane.
Okay.
Divide into LNG. Now, you need to be able to, increase your feedstock upstream. You need to build FLNG plants. You need to build more trains. But what is the input for going into FID? Number one, you can't get solid off-taker agreements because the off-takers don't trust your capacity to deliver in the contract because you have force majeure. If you can't get enough gas feedstock to supply the inland trains and the FLNG vessels that you probably are going to build.
Okay.
So what's the essence of being in Qatar if you can't look for emergency lending
support
for your central bank?
Why I brought this issue in is that it could also is one of the areas to address supply. But if we take a look at these BDCs, also last week the central bank came up with recapitalization guidelines for these folks, $2 billion for that's 2,500 million naira for tier 1 and tier 2. I spoke with the president of the Bureau de Change Operators on Friday, and he wasn't happy. As an association, they aren't happy about that move by the central bank. And he gave me instances of other countries where it's not up to 2 billion naira. What do you think that the existing 1,517 BDCs should do in terms of this recapitalization? Are they still too much? 1,517 now left from 5,690, I guess. If you take away 4,173. There's secondly, sorry, Kelvin, let me put in this issue so that we can round up on it. How do we permanently solve this foreign exchange crisis? We all know that is a problem of illiquidity, no supply. Where does the NNPC come into all of this? Cardoso was at the NNPC, I think, last month, where he met with the GCO, Mele Kyari, and they had a fantastic discussion, I was told. And the CBN now has a department, to sort out NNPC issues. Between me and you, that NNPC has not been remitting to the central bank. So how do we now address this? And President Tinubu has given a matching order for NNPC to be doing that. So looking at all of this, how do we permanently solve the issue of Forex?
So, it's not about the quantity of BDCs, it's about the quality. In my opinion, they should even reduce them to 500 BDCs that are well capitalized, raise their capitalization requirements 5 billion, because of the volume of transactions they process and the exchange rate today.
5 billion, they are not a bank, Kevin.
But they operate like banks. That's the reality. They operate like parallel banks in the black market.
They can't take deposits and all of that.
That's it. 5
you
billion
can also
today.
have a BDC now if you're interested.
5 billion naira today is less than $3 million, I think.
Yeah, it's about $5 million. Yeah.
No, it's about $3 million. It's about $30 million. Now look at the capacity of transactions the BDCs do. So it's not about the chairman of the Association of Bureau de Change Operators complaining that he doesn't need to like what the central bank is doing. As far as it's in the interest of the market and Nigerians, it is the right decision. Okay. On the issue of stabilizing the exchange rate, I honestly believe that we have a fiscal crisis. Okay, in my opinion, the Central Bank of Nigeria needs to come up with a coordination with the fiscal authority to raise emergency liquidity. That liquidity is needed because the exchange rate has a serious bearing on inflation. The exchange rate has a serious bearing on most macroeconomic indicators. The exchange rate determines the price of fuel. In fact, there are rumors that PMS subsidy is back by $1 trillion a month.
There are rumors. Kelvin, you are saying there are rumors. Have we not said it here on this show before?
Yes.
We questioned them sometime last year now.
Exactly. So
it's not rumors, it's fact. You will see it because the prices are not aligning.
They move from DSDP, they move to PPSA. So if you want to stabilize the markets, for example, and you want to come to the exchange rate, you have to look at the fact that you have a commercial refiner that just sent another 800,000 barrels of crude oil to Nigeria. How can Dangote import crude oil from America and then sell to Nigeria at a regulated price and collect subsidy from the government? It's not going to work. And him being able to supply petroleum products to Nigerians will have an impact on inflation, which will have an impact on the exchange rate. So the fiscal authority needs to align. It needs to ramp up its production of crude oil and gas. Yeah, it needs to get emergency liquidity to get that balance, that utility balance of net reserves, not gross reserves, net reserves, less your P&L encumbrances to your balance of payment for 1 year, right? And then it needs to raise the tax and non-tax revenue to GDP ratio to reduce the dependencies of the federal government on the Central Bank of Nigeria, which is the foundation of this crisis we have today, Nancy.
All right, Kelvin, I think we'll leave it at that. If I had more time, I wanted to ask you the contribution of banks. What will be the role of banks in all of this? Because if we have a cut of BDCs, you know, what will be the role of banks moving forward? Because many people still go to banks and they don't get FX. But that will be on another edition of the program. Thank you, Kelvin, and have a nice time in Lagos. I see you're enjoying Lagos and you left us in Abuja, but you and your traffic, enjoy.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, Kelvin. Let's quickly move on for a break, and when we come back, we'll be looking at another sticky issue, addressing incessant power blackout. God said, let there be light in Nigeria. You put on your lights, no light. Why have we seen a worsening power situation in the country? My guest, another Emmanuel, but this time engineer Emmanuel Oguche, senior consultant at Nextia Capital Limited, will be joining me on, after the break to talk about the power situation.
We can do it. We can build our country for the sake of the millions of the people. Delivery, yes, we must achieve it.
It could seem impossible because you don't dream big. When you have this mentality of an achiever, nothing is impossible.
So don't take on too much commercial or private debt so you can service. Any country, if you can service, if you're generating enough revenue from investing that money, fine. But if you're not, you have to be extremely careful because debt relief is not easy.
Hard decisions have been taken and they are required to help us because the central bank can't do it on its own. It has to work very closely with the fiscal side. One without the other is like, that famous adage of clapping with one hand. It won't go anywhere.
The last thing central banks want is the financial system, the tail of the dog, to start wagging the body of the dog, which is the economy itself. They don't want a feedback loop from bad finance to bad economics.
This is Moneyline with Nancy, and I am Nancy Nnaji, where I consistently give you a dose of finance, economy, markets, as well as investment information. All right, engineer Emmanuel Oguche, senior consultant at Nextia Capital Limited, joins me right now. Hello, Emmanuel, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nancy. Good morning.
Good morning. Just answer me. You guys are the people in this space. Yeah. Why is there been a worsening blackout incessant? You stay in Abuja. I don't know if it affected you yesterday. Yeah, it's been on for a few weeks. Why are we having this blackout?
So, it's an interesting time in the sector. A couple of things are happening almost at the same time. If you retrospectively look at what your last guest was saying, basically the FX is a mess and it has a kind of an impact on the whole value chain, basically. So for power in particular, there are a couple of things that affect power quality and sustenance of power supply. First among them being that the grid as it stands currently is just one grid that is serving the whole nation entirely, starting from Bayelsa down to Benin-Kebbi and the rest. So just one grid that's bifurcated into about 10 different transmission regions. And these regions are interconnected in a very radial format. Radial in the context that typically power is transmitted in either in radial form, which is a straight line, or in a ring form, wherein if it's a ring form, you have some form of redundancy within the network. So that is to say, if I say my power station is in Buari and I supply Gwarimpa, and Gwarimpa is connected to central area and back to Buari, if there's a problem between Buhari and Gwarimpa, there should be a way of augmenting for shortfall from another point. But when you now have a radial system, wherein is a one-way, traffic, and there's an issue on the line, naturally is, kind of disconnect the whole circuit, and of course the grid tends to shut down. So that is the predominant scenario of the sector. The other key issue is that power generally is dependent on generation. All right, so you have got to have enough generation to be able to meet the demands of the market. And if that gap is not properly maintained, there's a way it causes, it affects the frequency of the grid. And if the frequency drops below a particular volume, it has a way of also tripping the collapse of the network. So the last bit is that there's this common fallacy that the distribution companies are rejecting load, right? So if there's no proper load offtake from the system, and it kind of electrically unbalances the network, it also leads to another kind of collapse. So having said all this, the grid is very fragile right now because a lot of things are affecting it, like I said. There's been a lot of work done on reinforcing the grid. Within 2005 and now, I'm particularly sure that, like NDPH, for instance, have done almost 6,000 kilometers of transmission networks, and there's a lot of money being put into those areas. That, if you put the numbers in terms of finance numbers, it gives about $2.5 to $2.4 billion that have been put into transmission infrastructure in Nigeria currently. But while those efforts are being made, there are some other efforts that are supposed to be done simultaneously, i.e. installing like a SCADA system. The SCADA system gives you visibility on the network, shows you exactly what is happening in the network. That way, if there are issues, you could put immediate plans in motion to restore normalcy within the network. That system is yet to be fully installed, and that is why the grid is very, very unstable. So basically, TCN and virtually all the stakeholders are managing the grid from a blind spot. So they're not they're not sure exactly what is happening on the grid until...
If I get you right, earlier you said just one is working. Is that what you said?
No. So what I mean is, in terms of...
because I know that I think you have about 23...
We have 23 power plants in Nigeria.
Yes.
23 power plants
that are connected to the grid.
Contracted to the grid, yes. And those 23 is giving about 4,300 contracted capacity to the grid. Now, these power plants are predominantly within the gas belt, which is in Niger Delta region, area, and part of Lagos and Benin and all of that. But, so, if energies are being pushed to the grid, because the grid is the one grid, it's supposed to be electrically balanced between the north, the south, and the middle belt area. Now, so that balance gives you a particular, frequency value, which will guarantee that energy is transported uniformly across this grid. So if there's an unbalanced situation, like what happened in January in Akwa Ibom axis, where they said there was an issue with gas supply, that gas supply led to a generation load drop that also automatically led to a partial collapse of the grid.
Okay.
But if there's a SCADA system, as that is happening, you could automatically ramp up generation from another spot to augment for that shortfall.
Now, why is this power problem difficult to solve? And though that we've seen some kind of optimism from Adebayo Adelabo, who is the Minister of Power, why is this still difficult to solve? I know the issues there, but with the kind of optimism we've seen, do you think that we are on the right track? Earlier on, I did say during the market analysis that Transcorp Power is listing today. Of course, Transcorp Power is a generating, power generating company listing at 240. So that would also help deepen the market, perhaps a bit of investment also into that space. So why is it difficult for us to solve this power problem? That's one. Then number two is that the state, since President Buhari signed that act,
Electricity Act
last year, how much of state's involvement have we seen there? Because at least it's close to even 1 year now about that. Yes, it's close to that, or nearly close to that. For those of you in that space, what are the kind of conversations that you're getting from states? Do states even understand what's happening? Of course, we saw last week what happened in Abia State, for example, with Geometric Power, Professor Barton Naji's company and all of that. So speak to me about all of this, because the Act empowers the states now to generate, transmit, as well as distribute power.
So the thing is, starting from your first question, the power sector is a highly regulated sector, highly regulated in the context that both from decision making down to investment in the sector, and how you even reimburse, I can get your payback arrangement from your investment, and all these things are highly, highly regulated. That is tied to so many indices that even come down to the financials, like your inflation rate, your exchange rate, the volume of energy on the grid to be traded on, and a whole lot of things are actually driving the behavior of the market. Now, so basically, the reason why power has not really made so much move, if I'm to put it in terms of context, between 2005 and now, we're still battling around 4,000, 5,000 megawatts. So, but the actual installed demand from the distribution infrastructure in Nigeria is about 28,000 megawatts. We've not been able to do up to 5,000. So the issue basically is, it has to do with, one, trust in the market. There's an issue that has to do with, the issue of trust is a major issue, in the sense that you see between the regulators, the market participants, the customers at the other end, there's no proper synergy as to how to communicate the incidences or the events of the market to everybody's full understanding. That way they can be able to buy into the process and, of course, support each other or complement each other as the case may be. For instance, the investors go get their money put into the sector, and at the end of it, they are called all manner of names or labeled as if they're trying to frustrate the country and all of that. These are people that risk their reputations and their investment to put money into the sector by way of privatization in 2013-14. And this investment has not also given them the required dividend expected. The second bit is that the customers on the other side as well are also not responding. If you go to some regions in Nigeria, they have this entitlement mentality that they are not supposed to pay for power, especially when the power stations are settled in their communities. So all those issues have a way of affecting it. Now, from bottom up, the way the value chain is structured, it is the distribution arm that feeds financially to the whole sector. Now, you have a distribution sector that remits about 70% of its revenue to the market. That means whatever they collect, only 70% of what is going to come back to the market. And 70% cannot even take care of the whole cost of the value chain. So that is one bit. The second bit is that on the consumer side of it, there's supposed to be investment in metering. The discos have done quite a bit, but we are still around 40% metering debt. That is not enough to guarantee revenue recovery. But if there's a proper, like the minister in December, there was this retreat he put together for the whole value chain, wherein all the participants, both market and non-market participants, came to air their views and opinions on how best to translate this market. That process is coming up with a set of documents that will further guide the market to becoming more efficient. But that will take a while. Distribution business and power business all over the world takes a while. And it takes serious effort from both the policymakers, both the private sector, and of course the citizenry. All right. If you go to countries like Turkey and Co, where they have about 88,000 megawatts for 88 million customer population, there's a lot of concession they have to make. For instance, gas transport costs, they have to subsidize that. They have to provide some form of support for power generating companies to be able to set up the business so that the cost of generating power can be within the range that the customer can be able to afford. Now, coming down to the state market that you talked about, I'm sorry to say, but in Nigeria, we're used to passing the buck. Everybody's always passing the blame to the next person. Before this Electricity Act came into being, a lot of argument has always been from some states that I am very particular.
Give us power.
Give us power. We want to do this. I'm aware that Akwa Ibom State invested in the whole value chain, generation, transmission, and distribution. Some other states also did that. But since the Electrical Act came into 2023, it's only Enugu State that has a policy and a law. As we speak, it's only Enugu State government that has an electricity law, and has also went further to put together an electricity regulatory commission. We are fully involved of NEC. We are fully involved in that process, so we know what is happening there. They are very conscious about what they want to achieve, how they want to drive it, what are the processes involved, and what are the kind of collaboration and support they need.
And the states don't have the excuse now because they are getting more naira from FARC, and I'm wondering, we'll interrogate that, but I'm wondering what the states are not alleviating economic hardship on citizens. They are not even trying to put power together. What are you people doing? They'll just take the money and go to FX market and do all the shenanigans they want to do.
The truth about it is that power business is not a business that you snap your finger and it happens, all right? It takes a process.
Yes, it takes a process, but ours has taken too long a time because other countries too have done it and they get it right. I understand that there are legacy issues. Yeah. I understand that there is this behavior also to the market in terms of an average Nigerian thinks that that power is a public utility, it shouldn't be paid for, and all of that. There are issues around the cost and all of, I understand that. But will it take us from, since when?
So one of the ways to unbundle that, those constraints is what the electricity sector has actually done. What the electricity sector has done basically is to say, okay, I've given you power to go ahead and think around how you want to, expand your electricity market. And technically speaking, the grid, because of the uniform nature of the grid, this is an opportunity for the state to begin to come together and form some form of decentralized grid system. Like what happened in Aba through geometric power is a decentralized power system. So if any good state, for instance, that has taken the lead in this process, can come up and say, okay, let me set up a power station within a particular cluster in my area, generate power, and use my 3 kV network and wheel it to where I want to wheel it to. You can quickly ramp up power at that network. Even if you decide that, say, probably because of the lack of resources, because there's no much hydro pathways or there's no gas, enough gas reserve in Enugu State to do this, you could collaborate with a state like Imo State, or probably the South can come together and say, okay, let's talk among ourselves. Imo has gas reserves, generate power, Abia generate power, Anambra has a market around the whole of that Nnewi on the axis. It's an industrial cluster that can guarantee revenue back to the system, right? So the state can come together, have like a uniform legislation that enables them to generate, transport and distribute power within themselves. Of course, with certain, because of the uniformity and socioeconomic characteristics, they could put these things together and quickly ramp up power. But like you also said, it's taking so long for them to put up just policies and get the laws to come on board. Of course, if it takes this long, you can imagine how long it's going to take to actually have full impact in terms of energy to the customer at the last
month. Because for me, if you had a child, let's say in 2005 or even in 2013, how old that child is now.
Of course.
And that child is still in darkness in terms of when you want to put on the light, there's no light. It's something unheard of. And we have smart people, we have we have the resources at what is wrong with this thing? What is wrong with this power?
I must tell you, which is where I commend the current minister, is that there's actually finance for this process.
Finance,
there's money for this process.
There used to... Come on, Emmanuel. Oh, this is the first time I'm hearing there's finance.
There's finance.
Because there's been no finance. Even there's been getting intervention from central bank. We've seen different...
So the intervention you get from
and
CBN,
all of that. World Bank will say supporting power. But they will say, we don't still have enough money.
So the financing you're talking about is different to what I'm talking about.
So which one are you talking about?
You're talking about the people that are current market participants.
Okay.
I'm talking about the state government, for instance. And a state government can actually approach maybe any of the development institutions and say, look, help me with the process of setting up my market. Then when the market is set up, there may be some quick win projects that you can put together. You don't need to go to CBN for that. You can with World
CBN
Bank.
Will not even give
with World Bank, AFDB.
This CBN is not giving anybody money.
World Bank, AFDB, even private institutions like InfraCredit, Chapel and all of that. They have financing for some of these projects. All they needed to see a clear trajectory between when I'm putting in the money and how the money is coming out. And of course, it's properly reinforced and bankable. The money will come out.
How many megawatts do we really need to serve the needs of this economy? Because I've heard different stuff. You talked about earlier on installed capacity of about
28,000 megawatts.
How many megawatts do we need to serve this country?
So, to serve this country effectively, we need more than what is installed already.
Which is more than 29,000.
Which is more than 29,000. And why we say we need more than that is that there's a lot of self-generation happening that is not integrated into the grid. Now, what is currently connected to the grid is the 29,000, which is the aggregate installed transformer capacity from all the distribution company in Nigeria. But you and I know that energy is given to the man that has the money. The discos invest only where they can get their money back. So there's a lot of unserved and underserved communities that are using alternative source of power, probably generators and all of that. So if you ramp all this together, I think Nigeria needs more than 100,000 megawatts. Because if you take the example of Turkey, where they have a population of 88 million, they have 88,000 megawatts. India has about 1.something billion, and they have about 220,000 megawatts. As a matter of fact, their energy offtake in the month of January, the demand for the month of January for India was 222,000 megawatts. So if we get it 29,000, what it basically does for us is that it will increase access to the quantity of energy that is being offtaken. Currently, we are doing an average of about 12 hours nationwide from the energy that is being given out, right? With the 20, if we do the 29, we can get it up to like 16 or 18 hours per day, but also it also provide opportunity for energy access to be given to some other clusters.
Finally, because we've got to go, what's your outlook moving forward, especially with the posture of the minister? He also mentioned that there's underutilization of FG investments in the power sector. So what's your outlook moving forward? Because this power issue is also causing a cost of doing business crisis. There's a crisis that we're not talking about, which is a cost of doing business crisis that's been exacerbated by no power, foreign exchange crisis, inflation, and all of that. So very quickly, we've got to go.
For me, the first thing we need to do is that we need to take this conversation to the states, let them as quickly as possible begin to ramp up options that are available to them. Secondly is the distribution companies. I'm glad that the minister called two of the discos for a meeting this week to discuss why they are not giving our power. AEDC and Ibadan Disco. That kind of conversation needs to continue to happen. Then I also like the fact that the minister is everywhere talking about financing, talking about efficiency and performance. One of the key issues before now is poor governance and coordination. He is taking the lead in those areas. So basically what he's doing is to say, oh, look, the discourse, you have an issue, come to me. If next there's a problem, come to me. Let us see who are the problems within the sector. And lastly, for energy access, now that the state electricity are beginning to come in, REA will soon be unbundled to begin to look at the uniqueness of each of the states, and of course be able to devote resources to those states to be able to aggressively attack energy asset that is currently at 47%, which is very, very poor.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me.
Thank you. I've been speaking with Engineer Emmanuel Oguche, a senior consultant at Next Year Capital Limited. We've been looking at this incessant blackout across the country. That's how much you can take on today's edition of the program. Thank you all for joining us. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji.